Beneath the neon skies of Rio, where alien ships hum over the old bay, a fisherman spots a strange light drifting in the dark water. Inside that glow lies a secret so powerful it could heal worlds or ignite wars. A forbidden child of stars with wings too small to fly. And the choice of one family will decide the fate of humanity. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video and tell us where are you watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. Alright, under the hover causeway that crossed Guanabara Bay like a ribbon of slow lightning, Artur Mendes adjusted his sun-faded cap and tried not to think about the quiet in his home. The bay still looked beautiful, even with alien barges whispering through the air and signs blinking in a dozen unfamiliar alphabets. Next to him, Rosa let her feet swing above the dark water, knitting a simple scarf from recycled thread, one careful loop after another. Neither of them said the heavy thing out loud. They didn't need to. Years of shared glances had learned to speak for them. Above the city lights, a Zephyrin courier ship slid down through the force field like a falling firefly. Inside it, Princess Nalira paced her private cabin, one hand on a silvery crown that would not stop changing shade to match her anxious pulse. She had studied Earth languages for cycles and could charm a room when she needed to. But her confidence was paper-thin, hidden under her ceremonial shawl. A small pouch breathed warmth against her ribs. The pouch held a life Nalira could not explain. A creature no scan should allow. A gentle impossibility named Lumi. Lumi was not the heir Nalira had been ordered to provide. The clinic on Titan's dim underside had promised a solution, a quiet fix, a clean future. Instead, an egg had shimmered into being where no egg should be, and from that shell, a star dragon had broken free. Tiny as a kitten and brilliant as sunrise, the old stories said such dragons had once flown the vacuum between stars and warmed cold planets with the light inside their scales. This one had wings too small to lift her body in a place like Earth, and a soft chirp that meant mother in a language beyond words. Tash, Nalira's aide, asked if he should prepare the translation weave for the Brazil sector. Nalira waved him off, then whispered to the little dragon that the galaxy was not kind to wonders. Marshal Corvin would return soon, and if he found Lumi, there would be no mercy for the child or for the mother who had defied design. Rio glittered below, like a carnival frozen in glass. Nalira slipped a stolen clearance code into the shuttle and skimmed low over the water. She found the edge where streetlight faded and the tide braided shadows. There, in the hush between distant music and the thrum of generators, she loosened the shawl. Lumi looked up with eyes that held old constellations and new trust. Nalira pressed her forehead to the little brow and said a line from an ancient lullaby, "Live where I cannot." Then she let go. The splash was small, almost shy. The bay sighed. For a breath or two, the night stayed ordinary. Then a gentle glow spread around the drifting bundle. The dirty swirl along the seawall began to gather itself around the tiny body like a clear shell. The shine pulsed in time with a heartbeat, and small fish swam near as if to watch a sunrise that had forgotten to wait for morning. On the pier, Artur narrowed his eyes. That was not a buoy. It was not algae. It was steady. It was coming in. "Rosa," he said, voice thin with wonder. "There's a light in the water." Rosa set her knitting aside. A boat? Too still. They hurried along the worn planks, the wood telling stories under their shoes, the glow snagged on an old net, a relic left from a time when the fish had been plenty and the rules fewer. Artur climbed down the ladder, ignoring the ache in his knees, and waded out. His hands found slick rope and a trembling, warm shape. He eased the net loose and cradled the small, scaled body against his chest. The creature made a sound like a sigh of relief and tucked its nose beneath his chin. Rosa's breath caught. "My love," she whispered, "what is this little one?" "I don't know," Arthur said, and yet he did. He knew only this. The tiny heart beat fast against his palm, and it was afraid. "We can't leave her here." They wrapped the creature in Rosa's shawl and slipped through back corridors to their apartment, a place that smelled of tea and old books and salt. Inside, under a quiet lamp, the truth became impossible to ignore. The little being had scales mottled in violet and gold, eyes like dusk, and wings that seemed more like small thoughts than working limbs. She chirped, then purred, then nosed at Arthur's worn sleeve, as if it were a door she intended to open. "If we call anyone," Rosa said softly, "she will vanish into a lab." "If we don't," Arthur answered, "we break the rules that keep the peace." They stood on that thin line between fear and kindness. The dragon solved it for them by toddling toward a bowl and tapping it with her snout. Rosa laughed, a sound she had not made in a long time, and opened a tin of soup. The small one ate with brave focus, then curled into the shawl and slept. The glow dimmed to a slow pulse that matched the rhythm of the apartment. Outside, the bay resumed its night business. Above, the courier ship rose and was gone, leaving only a question held carefully in two tired human hands. Arthur drew a blanket around Rosa's shoulders and kept watch beside the sleeping dragon, feeling, to his surprise, that the apartment had become larger than its walls. Something had entered that was not just strange. It was hopeful. And hope, once it sits down in a chair, is hard to ask to leave. Morning brought cautious sunlight and the low chatter of neighbors sharing weather and gossip. Arthur brewed tea while the tiny dragon explored, nose to the floor, tail making gentle sweeps. She found the window, set her chin on the sill, and watched gulls argue about nothing in particular. "She's curious," Rosa said, smiling into her cup. "Curiosity is a healthy sign." They whispered about names. "We won't keep her," Arthur said, knowing the future would make its own decisions. Still, a name felt like a bridge between strangers. Rosa touched the little brow. "Lumi," she said, because the glow from the night had not left her memory. Little light. By noon, small changes had begun to weave through the building. The water filter in the hallway, which had coughed brown for months, ran clear. The stairwell air smelled less like tired pipes and more like rain that had decided to go easy on old lungs. Donna Root, whose life story contained more chapters than anyone else's, stopped by with bread and the sweet talent for questions that never sounded like accusations. She peered at the bundle on the sofa and tilted her head. "That pet, Arthur, is not from any shop I know. She's a rescue," Rosa said, which was the truth arranged in a simple coat. Word drifted floor to floor that the Mendes apartment had become unusually warm. The kind of warm that lives in kitchens where someone is always humming. That night, Tomas from downstairs visited with his mother. He had a chair with wheels and a grin that could cut through fog. Lumi padded over and laid her head on his knee. The room held its breath. Tomas whispered hello, and the little dragon answered with a soft light beneath her scales, like a lantern being polite. Days gathered themselves into weeks. Lumi learned the map of the apartment and the rhythm of Arthur's steps. She loved the old football matches Arthur watched on a faded screen, chirping when goals happened, as if she understood celebration before she understood rules. She perched on Rosa's lap while hands practiced stitches and seemed to pour comfort into the bones beneath. Rosa's fingers swelled less. Artur's cough grew lazy and then forgot to come at all. The hallway turned peaceful in the evenings, the small arguments that usually lived there wandering off, as if they had lost the taste for noise. Miracles never stay quiet for long. One dawn, Tomas stood in his kitchen, and with his mother's steady arms nearby, took 3 careful steps. His mother spread the news like a joyful rumor through the building. People came by with shy gifts for the little dragon who only purred and blinked and ducked her head as if happy to be part of other people's good days. Still, worry paced the apartment's edge. Artur knew the city had rules for unknown creatures. Rosa knew not every rule was designed to guard kindness. They kept Lumi indoors and invented a story about cat-sitting. Donna Rute raised an eyebrow high enough to reach next week, but said nothing, choosing to protect the secret with silence and soup. And then, the knock at 3 a.m. Archer opened the door to see a tall woman the color of soft ocean light, a crown pulsing along its edge, and 2 quiet figures behind her who looked like they could lift the building if it asked nicely. The woman's eyes found Lumi. Her careful posture cracked like thin ice. "You lived," she whispered. Rosa moved between the visitor and the sofa. "Who are you?" "Someone who failed," the woman said, voice low. "And someone who wants to make that right." She stepped into the light and introduced herself as Nalira, a diplomat from Zafara, who was not supposed to be here. She looked not at the humans, but at the small dragon who had tucked herself behind Rosa's knees, unsure. "Little light," Nalira said, in a language the dragon's skin seemed to hear. "I am sorry." Archer's fear stood up. "If you came to take her, that won't happen." The guards shifted, but Nalira lifted a hand. "I did not come to steal. I came to warn." Nalira told them with halting honesty about clinics in shadowed orbits and promises made by strangers who never gave receipts. She spoke of star dragons, of worlds healed and wars launched, of fuel that could run a fleet and a greed that could break a galaxy. Lumi, she said, was a living treasure and a living target. Marshal Corvin, who measured value in control, would see only what could be used. Rosa's eyes shone, but her voice was firm. "She is not a tool. She is a child. We are her home." Lumi walked forward, slow and brave, and touched Nalira's hand with her nose. A rush of images poured through the room without wires. An archive in the dark between stars, patient hands curating life, gentle figures known as the keepers, an egg waiting, a tide, a fisherman's gaze at midnight, and the soft decision that had saved everything. Nalira gasped, and then her posture changed. The crown dimmed to a deep, steady hue. "I will not betray you," she said. "I can erase the last signal and tell a quieter story." They stood in the kitchen with the kettle steaming like a small cloud. A plan took shape the way bread rises, with warmth, with time, and with someone deciding not to rush. Nalira would report the infant destroyed. The tracker failed. The file closed. She would visit rarely and teach gently. Artur and Rosa would guard the day-to-day, the important hours where breakfast is made and jokes are told, and homework, even when there is none, is discussed, because that is how families talk. When Nalira left before sunrise, the building felt like it had exhaled. Donna Root watched from her doorway and gave the smallest nod a person can give and still be understood. The city woke again. Above the bay, a pale strip of morning laid itself across the water like a promise written in quiet ink. Months found their rhythm. Nalira slipped in and out like a careful moon, bringing books that smelled of distant glasslands, trinkets that hummed kindly, and stories of places where the night sky looked like a field of silver wheat. She taught Lumi to shape thoughts into pictures, and soon the dragon could send a whole sunrise into a room without touching a window. Arthur taught patience and knots and the virtue of checking the weather twice. Rosa taught recipes, mending, and the secret math of love that turns one small apartment into a wide open home. The bay began to change in ways that could not be explained with official forms. A gentle clarity spread from the seawall, carrying fish back like a rumor of old days. The building's crime reports fell quiet. The hallway plants decided to become trees. People who visited left calmer than they arrived. Someone wrote a note on the lobby board. "Whatever you're doing up there, keep doing it." Someone else drew a heart and a small dragon next to it, and no one erased it. Lumi grew into the size of a fat dog, and then a lean cheetah, though her wings stayed small, like the memory of an idea someone had once. She loved playing with bottle caps, learning the city's songs, and curling around Rosa's ankles when thunder introduced itself. She could push her nose into thin places, the corner of a door, the edge of a cupboard, and make it through without opening anything. Once, she stuck her head through the freezer to catch a curious light and came back out with a delighted sneeze. "No more of that without a scarf," Rosa scolded gently, laughing into her sleeve. Then a message arrived on Nalira's diplomatic relay, couched in polite phrases that sounded like iron under velvet. Marshal Corvin's office had flagged a failed tracker event and reopened a file that should have stayed closed. A local tribunal hearing would convene to determine custody under asset law, a phrase that made Arthur's jaw set in a way the building recognized from the old days when he had argued with storms. Nalira looked at the family she had come to love and chose a path that would cost her rank. She filed a challenge at the Galactic Registry, reframing the case not as property, but as personhood. The argument traveled wires and light rails to high chambers carved out of slow-moving comets. Expert witnesses uploaded paragraphs that tried to hold a living glow inside a definition. News feeds caught the scent. Without warning, a small apartment became a dot on the galaxy's map that reporters wanted to circle with words like extraordinary. Donna Root, already the building's best historian, downloaded case law and began nightly study with a collection of aunties who liked a good fight when the fight involved protecting something soft. They made tea, they took notes, and they learned to pronounce terms that taste like marbles if you rush them. The aunties formed a wall of calm around the Mendes home, redirecting visitors with cookies and firm kindness. On the eve of the hearing, Lumi sat on the pier with Arthur and watched the bay slip from silver to blue. A small wind braided her whiskers. "Little light," Arthur said, voice hushed so the day would not break. "Tomorrow will be loud." Lumi rested her head on his shoulder and sent an image into his mind. A tree leaning into a storm, roots like fingers gripping the earth, not because it fears the wind, but because it loves the birds who need a place to land. Arthur laughed, the kind that fixes a person from the inside. "We will stand," he said. "Of course we will stand." The hearing took place in a chamber that held both windows and stars. On one side, envoys in crisp fabric read rules in clear voices. On the other, a boatman with calloused hands and a seam mender with quiet eyes held each other's fingers and did not pretend they were not afraid. Nalira stood between, crown dimmed, speaking for a future where power made room for tenderness. Corvin's counsel argued that anything born of unauthorized engineering belonged to the registry that kept order. Nalira said order without compassion is only silence dressed up as law. Then, at last, Lumi was invited to speak. The court installed a thought bridge used for species whose words take different roads. Lumi stepped forward, small wings tucked, tail still, eyes steady. She projected a simple phrase, "I am Lumi Mendez Nalira. I am a child, not a tool." The chamber changed shape in ways no architect could note. She followed with another thought, one borrowed from the keepers and revised with the courage of a young heart. Free beings heal better than owned machines. I will share the location of one keeper's sanctuary if this court sets a promise. Freedom for every rescued species within that vault, and protection for Earth as a place of refuge. The room erupted with whispers that sounded like rain hitting 1,000 roofs. Envoys did math in their heads the way merchants add up baskets. The chief arbiter, a clear-boned scholar whose body caught light and made it sing, asked the question chambers always ask. And if we refuse? Lumi sent the image of a lamp being turned down by its own hand. The vault would sleep until a gentler century. No threats, just a waiting that could outlast a fleet. The vote took longer than a breath, and shorter than a history book. The decision was read in a tone that had learned to be careful. Lumi was a free person under galactic law, and Earth would be registered as a sanctuary world with rights to protect any being who asked. Corvin left the chamber with his power dented, and Nalira, who had expected to be punished, found instead that some losses make more room inside a person for the right kind of light. The building celebrated with soup and drums and low laughter that rolled down the stairs like a kind river. The aunties updated their notes to include a new section called How We Saved the Bay's Brightest Secret with Tea and Patience. Archer danced with Rosa under the hallway string lights, their steps as modest as their dreams had once been, and Lumi, learning quickly, tried to follow along without stepping on too many toes. After the ruling, days unfolded like new pages. Nalira moved into the apartment next to the Mendez family, trading polished halls for a thin-walled joy that tasted like frying onions and soft guitars. She opened a tiny street stall that served Zephyrin comfort food reimagined for Earth tongues. The first bowls were politely confusing. By winter, the neighborhood lined up for seconds and told stories in the queue. Everyone called her Tianali. She did not correct them. Lumi kept growing not into a monster, but into a promise fulfilled. She learned to hum at a frequency that soothed sorrow, slipping gentle music under the doors of rooms where grief had come to sit for too long. She learned to push her small wings through Earth's dense air by sipping pollution the way a swimmer sips breath, turning smog into lift. The first time she rose above the sand without help, she corkscrewed twice and landed with such pride that even the gulls, who are poor sports by nature, hushed for a heartbeat. Small dragons began showing up along the coast years later. Not copies of Lumi, but cousins shaped by the world's own patience. They perched on rooftops and church steps and ferry rails, cleaning puddles with their tiny purrs. Children invented new games. Scientists invented new ways to say, "I do not know yet," which is honest science. People started planting more flowers. Some mornings, the whole block smelled like courage. The family grew the way good stories do, by invitation. Lumi showed Artur and Rosa a newsfeed about 3 children from a distant colony whose ship had limped into orbit with its hearts broken. The children needed a home that could learn their differences instead of filing them away. "We are too old," Artur said from habit. Rosa squeezed his hand with an answer she had been carrying since the night a light drifted toward their pier. "Being needed makes the years kind." They adopted the trio. The apartment learned to hold more laughter without asking for larger walls. Nalira set up extra beds, extra schedules, and extra patience. The children taught the neighborhood small miracles of their own. One painted street murals that moved when dusk arrived. One engineered a better garden filter from bottle caps and wire. One wrote poems in tidy numbers that made teachers cry in the good way. The building kept learning how to be a village. Years turned, as years do. Arthur left the world the way old fishermen prefer. Quietly, on a morning when the bay wore a soft shawl and the gulls were busy elsewhere. The neighborhood made a pathway of flowers from the pier to the door. Lumi sang low over the water, a layered melody that sounded like warm rain on the roof of childhood. Rosa lived on to teach Nalira the last shapes of family recipes and to braid the children's hair with memories. When she followed Arthur into the long hush, it felt less like an end and more like two chairs finally pushed together under a window that looks out on the best part of the day. Nalira stayed. She had outlived titles and uniforms and the need to be introduced with the word princess. She became simply Nalira Mendez to most, and Tia Nali to the loudest. Under her watch, the bay's edge became a long classroom where elders taught small hands to tie knots, to write names, to listen. As for Lumi, the city learned to tell time by the way her scales brightened at dusk. She ranged farther, lifting sickness from hospitals and salt from old wounds, and sometimes farther still, stitching brief doorways between places that had forgotten they were neighbors. She helped midwives in Amazon towns and marine crews on the southern ice. She visited the keeper's vault under agreement, bringing back seeds of species that had been waiting politely for the galaxy to become kinder. Slowly, carefully, it did. 10,000 years is a number, and then it is a feeling. Earth remade itself into a living weave of forests and homes and waters that talk back when spoken to softly. Dragons in all sizes became as common as street cats once were, tolerating pats and guarding rooftops at night like silver chimneys. Rio changed and stayed the same, which is the secret of cities that refuse to forget their own songs. On a small beach, the city decided to protect forever. A memorial grew over centuries out of the slow crystal of dragon tears. It was not shaped like a hero or a ship. It looked like a wave, caught at the precise instant it makes up its mind to fall. A sentence glowed within it, readable by any traveler who laid a palm to the quartz. The words were simple. Here, a light crossed the water and found a home. Every year, on the night when the old story began with the quiet splash and the brave decision to climb down a ladder, people gathered. Not to mourn, though some did, softly. Mostly to practice the art that saved a universe more than once. Noticing a small glow and choosing to move toward it. Old songs mingled with new, and children asked the same question children always ask when wonder touches ground. How did this begin? Lumi, older than anyone, and yet somehow still the apartment's little light, would smile in that way dragons do when their eyes hold two suns. She never told the story with the same words twice. Sometimes she spoke of a fisherman who learned that hope is heavy and worth carrying. Sometimes she spoke of a seam mender who taught the whole building that kindness is a craft you practice daily. Sometimes she spoke of a young diplomat who walked away from a throne to walk toward a kitchen table. And always, she closed the tale with a line that fit the night like a good coat. Love is clever. It looks for empty rooms and fills them. It finds tired hands and teaches them new work. It meets a small glow on dark water and says, without knowing the end, "Come in." The wave of crystal kept shining after the crowds went home. The bay kept breathing, old and new at once, and in the apartments nearby, where lights blinked out one by one, neighbors slept easy, certain of one useful truth: impossible things become everyday things when enough hearts agree to hold them together.